Hi, I'm John Papola, and you're listening to the Emergent Order podcast. When we began research and development on our first feature film, At the Fork, we quickly came across an incredible company led by really one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in the space. That company is Vital Farms, and its founder is Matt O'Hare. Matt is a serial entrepreneur in the true sense of the word. Since he was a little kid, he's been starting companies. He's really done something amazing with Vital Farms. They've revolutionized the way eggs are manufactured. In a very real sense, they're the test case, if you will, for conscious capitalism. So I'm excited to share this conversation with Matt, and I hope you enjoy it. So Matt, let's start with your first business, because you've had a lot of businesses. So when was the first?
That depends how you describe first. My first business, from my recollection, is that I lived on a peninsula in Rhode Island called Warwick Neck. And because it was a peninsula, there was only one paper route. And that paper route was, that was it. That was the big income earner. This is a baby boom time where we had a lot of young people in our neighborhood. Everybody had 8 kids or 6 kids, so there's hundreds of kids in the neighborhood. And when the guy who had the paper route was getting ready to graduate from junior high school, whatever age you graduate for when you get rid of your paper route, I wanted it. And I negotiated to buy his paper route for $50. Which is a lot of money. It was every bit dime I had.
Your first merger and acquisition deal.
I was 8 years old, and it was a long paper. It was 8 miles. I'm sorry, it was 5 miles. I was 8 years old, from beginning to end on a bicycle and up and down hills, and with 50 pounds of papers in the back, and it was quite an ordeal. And yeah, so
you bought the paper route.
I bought it, and I did it 6 days a week. It was 2 to 3 hours every single day, and I did not know. No one told me that you could quit. I didn't, not that I was like, someone forgot to tell me that. So no matter what the weather, I was out there. And then I wanted to take advantage of it, so I leveraged the customers. And so I'd sell them Christmas cards in the summer. You'd go out and sell them the Christmas cards, and they'd have them engraved with their name on it and stuff. And then in the wintertime, I'd sell them seeds for the spring. And I always had another thing. And we had to collect. That was the toughest part, so you had to learn accounts receivable and collections and mark and paid, and so it was a pretty good learning lesson for me. Was your dad? Tell me about your family life, because it's one thing to just, because you really were treating it like a business, not a job. So that's a mentality that at 8 years old, or where would you think as an 8-year-old, like, all right, I got some captive customers here. What else can I sell them? I didn't think about that at the time, but I thought about it in recent years, because I have 7 brothers and sisters, and they're all successful in their own right, one way or another. But I was the only entrepreneur in the family. And we all had the same upbringing. We all went to the same kind of schools, all lived within a 13-year period, from the earliest to the latest. I was right in the middle. And so there's nothing, it was just, I've always loved the concept of business and starting a business. To me, it's like an amazing art form, and I just love that art form. I love that medium.
What did you do for school? What was school like for you?
I was never real loved school at all. I mean, from the very beginning, it was, I could be great at it or I could be lousy at it. It really just depended on whether I liked the subject or whether I liked the teacher. I guess you would have called me today ADD in school. I'd stare out the window a lot in boring classes. I went to Catholic school through 6th grade, and I flunked religion every year, and penmanship. The 2 things I remember being consistent. I'd argue with the nuns about, crazy rules that they had. This is a venial sin, this is a mortal sin. And if you have a mortal sin before Saturday when you go to confession and you get killed by a car, then you went to hell. And if a baby didn't get baptized before they died, then they went to this place called limbo, which I guess they did some type of weird Caribbean dance. I'm not quite sure what.
As a Catholic that went to 12 years of Catholic school, I can appreciate.
Yeah, you're
not
probably
quite.
You didn't go through. This is pre-Vatican I when they changed the limbo rules and a few others. But
So you were really, they did the pseudo modernization deal. It was got a little.
Yeah, I was an altar boy, and I had to learn the Mass in Latin. So this is pre-Latin. This is before the Mass was in English. Yeah, I guess I just dated myself a little bit.
So when you got into higher ed, Like, what did you do for college? And
I skipped it.
you skipped it.
Yes. So I was kind of groomed. I loved the restaurant business. I loved cooking from a very young age, and I kind of wanted to get into hotel restaurant administration. That was So once I said that out loud, my dad was like, "You're going to Cornell," and so
Right.
he went to Notre Dame. He really wanted me to go to, that was the only hotel restaurant administration degree in the country that was worth anything at the time was Cornell. Later on, Miami and a few other schools got it as well, and then Johnson Wales and others. So I was really being pushed in that direction. So I went to prep school at some point. I went a couple of years to a place called the Hill School in Pennsylvania. And then for my senior year, I decided I didn't want to go to prep school anymore, and I moved to a little island off the East Coast called Block Island, and graduated from high school out there on my own, had a bartending job at night, and barely survived my winter out there. But during that time, I applied to Cornell, and I went up for 2 interviews, and it was good to go. And I all of a sudden one day woke up and said, "I'm done with school. I have no interest in going." So I called Cornell. "Can I take a year off?" Called my parents and told them I'm taking a year off. But underneath it all, I knew I was never going to go to college. I wanted to get going and start a business.
And is that what it was? You just felt ready to get started. You didn't want to be running in place, going more classes.
Yeah, I mean, if I was going to be a brain surgeon, I really need to go to college. And by the way, if I ever decided I need brain surgery, I want a guy with a degree. I want to see that degree. I might even check his grades. But for business, I just didn't feel I needed to. I already had at that point a number of little businesses along the way. Probably half a dozen. A house painting business and a number of other little things here and there. And I was ready to get going and start something meaningful. So.
Did you, at any point in your life, regret not getting a degree?
No. There were times that I knew that it would have helped me and I had to learn a lot. But, I saw that stack of books in your office a little while ago, and I had those types of stacks of business books on everything. A lot of them were, kind of campy.
There's a lot of books that really are only 40 pages of content, and they have to inflate them up to be 250 so that they can be a book instead of a paper.
And a lot of them you could get at the 1 Minute Manager, and there was a lot of those types of books that were really helpful in a way. I mean, they give like quick hints, and you could boil down. I think a semester of business school classes are a lot like a book. You could probably get that whole semester into a few hours, but they keep you there for whatever a semester is these days, 3 or 4 months of classes, because they're trying to sell that too. So I don't see there's much difference. I condensed my education down, and I remember taking a course that Arthur Andersen and one of the big accounting firms put on called Understanding Financial Statements for Non-Financial Executives. And I sat in a one-day class and got myself a finance degree. Maybe it was 2 days, but it was 2 days of learning the difference between how a P&L worked, how a balance sheet worked, what the difference is. And I was 20 years old, but that was really helpful to me.
So at the level of the abstract, just like as a business, what is the first most important thing that makes an enterprise a business, that makes an activity a business?
First thing you have to do is you have to be fulfilling a need that is unfulfilled, or that someone else is not doing a good enough job of. So it might be a void, in the geographical void in the marketplace, a gas station on a corner where the nearest one is, 10 miles away, in a growing community. Or it could be a business idea, a great concept that no one's thought of yet. Having people, drive their own car to your house and pick you up and give you a ride somewhere and drop you off instead of calling a car service. Those ideas, so you have to fulfill a need. And then it has to be something that could be done where the capital needs are not extreme. I'd like to go to Mars, but that might be out of the question right now.
You just got to start a couple.
Actually, I don't want to go to Mars. I'm going to leave that to Elon to do. But
you got to start a couple of ancillary, not seemingly related businesses, tie them all together, build a world-class Twitter account, and then go to Mars.
And keep out of the SEC's way, yeah, all at the same time. So yeah, there has to be, it has to be doable. In other words, so it's like setting a goal. You want to have something that's clear objective, make sure it's achievable, and in your own mind, at least, as an entrepreneur. And then it has to, I think, you have to, as an entrepreneur, you have to accept the fact that it's not dreaming anymore, that you have to be able to commit a tremendous amount of your personal resources to it. Not just financial resources, but the part that makes an entrepreneur successful versus someone with good ideas is the execution. And that can be really boring at times. For an entrepreneur, the whole idea of a startup is fun, but it quickly goes from, pre-game show with all the ideas to blocking and tackling. When it's play after play of just getting, beat up. And one of my first, I guess, is my second or third company, a company I started called Barter Exchange. That company was a great idea. There were people that were doing poorly. We came up with a way of doing it right. We built the headquarters in Austin, Texas. We opened franchises all over the United States. We had centralized accounting and bookkeeping, and we had thousands of clients doing transactions with a currency a lot like Bitcoin is today, our own currency. And but that was 12 solid years, 13 including the planning year of my life, and that's a slog, especially when that first year was at age 26, 27, and it ended, when I was nearly 40. And so, yeah, it was 40, actually, when I sold it.
So I want to dig in deeper to barter exchange because it's precursor to a lot of things that I think today feel like broadly kind of popular. So you said you started it when you were 26. Mm-hmm. So
27.
what was the concept at that time? Like, what was your insight, or what customer were you seeing you could serve?
Right.
And like lay it out for me. Like, okay, all right, I got this idea. What is it?
So first of all, like a lot of ideas, it wasn't completely new. There were other people doing similar types of barter companies, but they were failing one after another.
And what is it? What is it? What is a barter company? What does this mean?
So the idea is that it's basically a way to move excess capacity or inventory in your business and sell it for a currency, placeholder currency, that will allow you to buy something you actually need in your business.
So give me like a tangible example.
Let's say you're a restaurant owner and you need to build a new sign. You have a crappy sign out there, it's not doing it. You know that it's going to cost you, let's pick a number, $10,000 for the new sign. Your restaurant's operating at 50 or 60% capacity. Your cost of goods in a restaurant, the fixed cost of goods, usually runs in the 20%, 25%, 30% range. That's the range, 20 to 30 in most restaurants. And so that's incremental cost of goods. That's just to serve an additional customer. It's not your fixed cost. So you got to save money from your existing sales, your profits, if you have any, until you got that $10,000 together in your bank account, and you're going to hire the sign guy and spend it. So in the barter exchange system, we had thousands of clients. They're all businesses. We had sign builders, and we had businesses who would love to eat in your restaurant. So you join the exchange, and we'd start sending businesses to you to eat in your restaurant, customers. And that'd be incremental on top of your existing cash business. You'd earn trade dollars into an account, as opposed to each client that ate in your restaurant would be paying with our credit card. And you'd earn trade dollars from their account into your account. And when you get $10,000 in your account, you go out and buy the sign. So basically the difference is you're buying that sign. At the end of the day, you have your $10,000 cash still in your drawer. You didn't have to spend that. And your real cost of goods in that sign was your 23% food cost. So you bought a $10,000 sign for $2,300 in essence.
So I can make sure I'm understanding this right. So the benefit to me, so my brother-in-law is a restaurateur, so I'm thinking about him. I've got at any given time a bunch of empty seats, which means capacity I could be filling, but
Sure.
I'm not. If I want to make that money in cash, I'm already trying to fill the seats,
Sure.
and I'm not filling them.
I'm assuming you're doing everything you can to fill your restaurant.
So it's not as easy as just make more money because I'm trying my best.
Sure.
So I still got this capacity. So what you offered me was not just the connection to the sign guy, but you also essentially offered me the customers.
Exactly. So it's kind of a marketing service. It's old-fashioned barter. The reason we do barter to begin with is you trade for something you need, and you wouldn't have had that deal otherwise. So it's very common. It's been done. Barter was the first form of currency ever. There wasn't any then went to womp them as if, shells or whatever. But at first it was, here's a pig, I want some of those greens you're growing in your garden there. And
the sort of the economics 101 of it all is okay. So you created a currency even inside it. So you call it a barter exchange, but you're overcoming what economists will call the double coincidence of wants. So I want a sign, you want a meal. You're not a meal guy. The meal guy is somebody else who doesn't want a meal.
Yeah.
So how do we overcome that? That's what money was invented to do.
You're serving Middle Eastern food. I don't like Middle Eastern food. Whatever it happens to be. You got to. So it eliminated the need for a bilateral trade and turned into a multilateral. And it really isn't a trade anymore once you flow it into currency. So we started that in 83 actually, 1983.
Now, who are the companies that are doing that at that time that you could and
they were shortly out of business. There were 3 companies. One of them stayed in business, and they were doing it somewhat properly, I thought. And the other 2 companies were quickly out of business. And the leaders of one of the companies went to prison, and it was a pretty interesting time. We came in. We immediately started. One of my things is that we were going to have our currency audited every single year. No one else was doing that. So we bought in KPM. It was called Pete Mark at the time, but it's KPMG, which is one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. And we brought them in, a partner in, and they audited our company every year. And from the very beginning, we treated it like a bank, and we didn't mess with it. The other companies were deficit spending. You know how that works. So they were dealing themselves their own currency.
Right. They were sort of borrowing against the float, if you will.
Yeah. And so what happens is they created inflation. If you look at it. So we actually used to plot M1 against velocity every month on a Laffer curve, if you believe it or not. We used the Laffer curve. And
so explain what, for somebody who's not a monetary policy geek, what are you talking about?
So the best thing that happens in an economy is velocity of number of transactions that take place and the volume of transactions. You want people buying and selling. It creates wealth for everybody in the economy, and it creates taxes that are able to pay for the infrastructure that we use every day, like a fire department and roads and police department and everything else you might need to live in a society. And so, but more transactions, the more wealth is created within the economy. If one of the important things about creating those transactions is people have to value the money supply. They value goods, but they don't necessarily value the paper. In order to value that paper, the paper has to be perceived as having value. The way it's perceived is when you go to spend it, people don't say, no, I don't want that shit. They want it. So
Venezuela is having a problem with that right
Exactly
now.
Right. I found a note the other day, $1 trillion note in some currency in Africa. I can't remember which one.
Zimbabwe. I have one of them. Yeah. I have $100 trillion Zimbabwean piece of currency.
I found it at home the other day, and Catherine stuffed. Like, where did we get this? Maybe you gave it to me. So the currency has to have value. So what happened in these other exchanges is they
print more.
They print. They buy their own stuff. They buy stuff for themselves. So they see something for sale and barter, and they liked it, and they just go buy it, even though they weren't creating value.
One of the best explanations I ever heard of the sort of what money represents in real terms is it's a receipt for your contribution.
Yeah.
And when it's not that means something's going on.
So in the failed exchanges, what would happen is members would join, and they would get swamped with business. You're the restaurant owner again, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, you're at 50%. You got a line out the door. Well, that feels great. You've earned in a single month. You earned 20,000 trade dollars. Now you get this account, and you call the sign guy. The sign guy says, "Nope, got too many of those." You call the paving guy for your parking lot. "Nope, I'm already done. I've already got too many trade dollars." And you start calling around. No one's selling. Everybody's buying because they've created imbalance in the currency. We created a balance in the currency. We issued credit lines. We did a credit-based currency as opposed to a deficit-based currency. And so that really kept us in business very strongly over the years.
So how did you crack some of these nuts as a somebody who didn't go to college, and how did you that's an interesting problem to try to solve. I mean, it's not your typical I see a customer I'm gonna sell. You were building a system. That was a business that was building a system.
Right. Well, we saw the other companies were doing it wrong. It was very clear what they were doing, and so we said, how do you do it right? And so it's back to how do you start a company, and we created a business where we managed that currency, and we did plot it every month, and so we went back to looking at the curve, which showed that as you increase the money supply, through credit. At some point, it peaks, and then you're during that entire time on the was this the y-axis? The up and down?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
On the y-axis, the money supply would be on the x-axis down along the bottom, and then the velocity, the amount of trading that takes place, the trade volume, would go up until you got to a peak. And then if you had too much money supply, too much credit, or too much deficit spending in the other cases, then you saw the decline in trade volume. And so we would actually increase credit lines to our customers, be more aggressive on credit granting if we saw that the volumes were too low because people were complaining they didn't have enough business. So you could hear it anecdotally, like, when are you going to send more people to my restaurant? I'm not getting enough business, so there's not enough money supply.
Right.
Or not enough clients. That's the other thing. So we'd have a sales force out signing new businesses up into the system all the time. And at the same time, we'd give credit lines and be more bold with the credit issuance to our customers. Maybe let that restaurant owner buy the sign first, give him a credit line, and
Right.
and then he'd buy the sign and then pay it off with new customers coming in the restaurant, like a credit card.
In Depression Economics, Paul Krugman tells a story about a similar type of business, in a sense that I think it was a daycare center, and they had some kind of coupon currency, and they ran into this trouble of they weren't issuing enough coupons for all of the, because it was like a barter between the babysitters and the parents. And so, in a way, that's like what happened with the Great Depression, is you had like the money supply fall out, and then nobody had dollar business coming in the door.
Yeah.
It's one of these things that until you explained to me what this business was, I thought it was only a thing that central bankers were worrying about, that there wasn't really a corollary in the private market to having to try to address these problems.
And you may not agree, but if you look at the genius of what happened in 2008, there's different. The genius was that some of the smartest people got together and kept a complete explosion because they did some things that were very aggressive. And one of them bailing out GM. Well, we made a ton of money on that, it turns out. But we did also a more aggressive economic policy with the Fed and other forms. And at the end of the day, we're better off today than we were, not only in 2008, but in 2010, 11, 12, 13, on and on.
The ironic thing, not to go down too much of a rabbit hole.
I knew this was going to get you going.
So I'm not a huge fan of bailing out particular companies, but I think what is the case, and so this is something that it's taken me, I continue to read about the financial crisis to this day. One of my favorite economists on this said that, here was the ironic thing. Even as of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, and you can go back to the Federal Reserve minutes, the Fed was still worrying about inflation. And so they were bailing out firms. They were generating money to bail out firms. They didn't bail out Bear Stearns, but they bailed out Bear Stearns creditors, and then they stepped in and did until they started doing the quantitative easing. All the money they were putting into these firms and into the economy, they were doing what's called sterilizing, which is they were then selling bonds and taking the money out because they were worried about inflation. And in like November, I think they actually started paying interest on reserves, which is paying banks to not lend. So on the fiscal side, you had all these bailouts, but the Fed was actually being very contractionary through the summer and the fall, and it really wasn't until QE that they stopped doing that. And even to this day, they've continued to pay interest on reserves. So the interactions of the Fed with the maybe you should have been the Fed chairman instead of Ben Bernanke.
Well, what they did, which was smart, which they took interest down to, a half a point and even less, and they've been trying to get that back now because we started pre-recession, it was 5.5%.
Right.
People can conceive with that today. That's what it was beforehand. That's not what interest rates were. What was it? It was either 4.5 or 5.5. It was right.
Which rate are you talking about? Like the Fed funds rate?
The Fed funds rate. And so they took that down to half a point. And that easing, of course, no one ever said they act quick at the Fed, but
no. And it's like it's funny because some of the most free market economists, like there's a couple schools of thought on the free market side. There's folks who say like, and I'm not a fan of the Fed. I'd rather have private currency, but there's the folks who are like hard money, low interest rates are always bad. You're always printing money if you've got low interest rates. But when you look at, again, like these, they call themselves market monetarists now. They were saying actually sometimes, and in the case of like in the aftermath of the crisis, low interest rates aren't necessarily a sign that the Fed's printing too much money. It can be the case that it's because they didn't print enough. Mm-hmm. And so they've created a deflationary environment. Because the same thing, right? There was high interest rates in the 80s or in the late 70s and in the early 80s because of the high inflation. So you can have sky high interest rates and high inflation because the rates are high because of the inflation. So there's this kind of sequencing thing.
That time, the interest was raised to combat inflation. I was a beneficiary of I had a carpet cleaning business back then, and I got an SBA loan that was approved when the interest was 9. When it was funded, it was 18.25%. That was my SBA interest rate. Oh, 18, and it was devastating to my business completely because they were trying to fight inflation with interest, but they were behind the curve again.
I do wonder where we're headed now with these issues, because I've come to think about these monetary issues in terms of like you were saying, like velocity times money supply is like the amount of the nominal GDP basically. And I've stopped thinking about inflation, and I really look at things in terms of like nominal spending. And I believe, like Scott Sumner's The Economist. If you haven't read his blog, The Money Illusion, I highly recommend it, because I think it's one of the best expositors of not just like what's happened with the financial crisis, but also what's been going on with all this stuff around central banking and finance at this level, this macro level. So, but to come back to your business, so you've built yourself an economy essentially, and you guys are the central bankers of this economy. What happens? How does it start to take off? You said, did you go public with
No,
the company?
I was the world's leading expert in failed public offerings. I had one after another attempt. It was only a year after we started the company, not even a year, 6 months, 8 months after we started, that I was approached by investment bankers out of Philadelphia who wanted to put $1 million into the business. And just before closing, there was an investment banker or a underwriter in New York that wanted to take us public. And so I was ready to go public as 27 years old, and I was way unprepared for it. And just before we filed all of our documents and spent all the money, and then just before we were supposed to go effective, the window closed. I didn't know there was a window. I didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, what does this mean? What
does the window mean? Well, it means that no IPOs are taking place. We have periods, even recently, we have periods of time, 6 months to a year, where not a single thing goes out in the market. The market is not favorable for IPOs. Right now, the window's wide open. So Uber and Beyond Meat and all these guys are going public here, Lyft. But yeah, there are periods of time where the window closes. And
so that's more of a phrase of just like, what's the environment like, than like the SEC saying like, nope, window's closed for this month.
Yeah, it wasn't an SEC issue. And that was a big problem for us, because we had given back half the money because we didn't want to have all that money raised at that lower valuation. We're going to have a higher valuation than the IPO next month. So we gave back all the money we really needed for working capital. And then now we had minimal amount of capital and no access to new capital because of the markets. And it was that's one of those things we start blocking and tackling. It wasn't much fun. And we had a long slog. So we got into franchising and raised, so that was another form of capitalization for us.
So for somebody who isn't familiar with these sort of financial terms on the business side, like what does working capital mean? And like this sense of like, I don't have a lot of personal experience with this, because our company is the three partners. We don't have outside investors. So when you're a business person, when you're an entrepreneur, and you've built a business that's making money, customers are buying your service or your product, why would you what are reasons to take on outside investment? And what does that relationship tend to be like? I mean, I'm sure it differs wildly, but why sell some of your company to somebody else if you're in business and you're growing?
Working capital, to start with, is basically, I'll put it in layman's terms, it's access to available cash the business needs to achieve certain things. as a homeowner, most people know that when you want to buy a house and it costs you $300,000 to buy that house, most people can't write that check. So they go to the bank and they borrow that capital, and they pay it back over time as they out of their income from their job. So business needs capital for various things. They may need to build a facility. They may need to buy a piece of equipment. They may need to buy any number of things to make their business work properly. They may need to front the cost of an advertising campaign, a digital media platform, whatever. And then if a business is growing, when you start to make sales, a lot of businesses have accounts receivable. So that's money they haven't received yet. And so their bills are the same every month, but they may have sold something to a customer where they're not going to get paid for 30, 60, or 90 days. So that's another form of use of capital. And then inventory is another one, use of capital. So a lot of businesses, if you have a store, you've got to stock it, and you've got to pay for those goods in the store, possibly before your customers come and buy them from you. Some things sit in the store for weeks or months before they're sold. So all those things use capital. And so you either have enough because you've borrowed it or you've saved it, or you've got to go out and get it from a bank. And a lot of small businesses don't have access to capital even through a bank because it's too big of a risk. And that's when you go to your brother and cousins and friends and you borrow, or you sell a little piece of the business to them or give a little bit of the equity away. And so those are various reasons to raise capital in various forms, which is equity, which you sell a piece of your business, or debt, which is where you borrow the money from either a bank or friends and family. And then another reason to sell a portion of your business is to get liquidity. So if the business is worth a lot of money, but it's not generating a lot of short-term income, and you'd like to enjoy some of that, it's a way to do that, and it's to sell a little bit of the business and to take some of that money off the table.
So in a sense, that's like cashing out some portion of the
without selling the whole thing. You could sell a little piece of it.
Are there early lessons in dealing with investors that if you can only basically go back to your 27-year-old self and deliver one message in a time traveling bottle, what would it be?
I think that number one, and I think I was pretty smart about this early on, but be really careful before you take on a partner. I think partnerships are wrought with peril. I think that in the business, you really want to know who's in charge to begin with. And so if you're going to give away percentage ownership of business, you should give small to people you want as your partners. You should bring them in, but I would be cautious about shared partnerships. It sounds great. You see a lot of it with friends coming out of school together, and they start partnerships, and then sometimes they regret it. Sometimes it works out great, but a lot of times they regret it. So when I started I had owned 100% of my first company, my second company, my third company, fourth company. But when I started Barter Exchange, I kept 50% of that company, and one of my investors was a cash investor, and he got a certain percentage for his cash investment, and then the other person who had the expertise came out of the industry already and had been in the business for a while, and so he got money for his stock for that investment. And it was really simplex formula. I said, you get 30% for putting up cash, and you get 20% for putting up expertise. I got both, so I'm getting 50. You're getting 20, you're getting 30, and everybody was good with that. I was too generous, especially on the cash investment side. I was on my cash partner. I was way too generous.
Why do you say that?
Because the amount of money we put up wasn't that much, and the expertise was probably worth a little bit more, and probably I didn't pay myself for my entrepreneurial experience, and so I bought a non-entrepreneur in for the expertise, and my cash partner was a 50-50 partner in a very small business we had, and we used the cash from that company, which was making some pretty good short-term money, to fund the company. But in general, I guess if you're looking for big life lessons, business partners and investors are like it's a form of marriage, and you should really get to know them and really know what their character is like and whether they're going to be with you. And you should get some commitments early on out of them. If we don't hit our numbers, are you ready to write another check? That's the type that'll really help explain. And you got to look what they're real. If they're only about getting cash and they're not about part of what your real mission is as a company, that also is not a good reason to have them as investors. You want them to believe in what you're doing.
Capitalism gets a pretty bad rap these days, and one of the things I think that's at the heart of that is a sense of the sense that commerce or that transacting in for money or for profit is sort of somehow corrosive, but like morally corrosive. But almost everybody I know will say something along that's done any kind of business will say something like what you just said, which is if you want to have a partner, you really have to have like vision and values kind of aligned, which really feels like it cuts against that. Like, how do you think about you obviously love business and entrepreneurship. How do you think about like the kind of aesthetic, if you will, that comes out of doing deals, and what kind of friendships, what kind of human relationships emerge out of all this activity, starting businesses, having partners? Have you found it social or antisocial?
Oh, very social for the most part, and it's fun when things work. It sucks when they don't. It's like life. Business is a lot like life, but I think that like a lot of people, I think that most of the good that's happened economically in society over the last hundreds of years have been because of business, and a lot of the failures is when we hand it over to governments and say, you're totally responsible. I mean, socialism was a massive failure. We saw that in the 20th century. It was every single 100% socialist government, collapsed in one form or another. And even China now is one of the most capitalistic nations on earth.
They've got some creepy things like the social credit and stuff. That,
of course, but
I mean, yeah, they're obviously a thousandfold more capitalist than they were under Mao. That's
a lot more billionaires there today than there are in the United States, from what I understand. And so it's really turned into a capitalist zoo over there, in a sense. And of course the government is still meddling and doing their thing, but no, I think that capitalism and business is an amazing conduit for raising everybody up, and a lot of people that don't understand it, it's easy to poke holes on it. I mean, there was a time when I was first starting I had a carpet cleaning business back in the mid-'70s. I started in Houston. I was 20 years old, and I started it just on a lark, and the next thing you know, I had 60 employees and 20 some odd vehicles, and we were cleaning the Astrodome and the venue where the Rockets played, and Aramco Towers, and we had trucks running every day in all different directions around the city. And I was involved in meditation at the time, and there was kind of a community of people that practiced that meditation. And I had naturally hired a lot of people in that community. But there was this, I always sensed there was sort of an undercurrent of resentment, because they were sort of it was we were all really young, and, I was the business guy, and
right.
They worked for me, and that just didn't seem right, but I provided the incomes for them, and they worked hard. But there was I got a lot of feedback from that back then. You could see there's always a little bit of resentment. So I think a little bit of it is jealousy when people say that, and they want to redistribute wealth. And I get it, because there has been a real broadening of a difference between the rich and the poor in this country especially, but all over the world. And there's got to be ways to at least make sure that the playing field is level. And when we make the playing field not level, that's one thing. But when the playing field is level and good players, or those willing to put the hard work in, succeed, and those that aren't putting the hard work don't, then that's almost tough luck time.
I had this video concept that hasn't yet found a partner, but of trying to essentially teach the different incentives that exist in these different systems, capitalism, socialism, whatever you want to say, as a team, as a football team that would travel around on away games, and they'd go to one away game, and the rules would be you had to, suck up to the refs, and you could, if you bribed them enough, they'd do it their way. Another was,
and you could get into some great colleges, or your kids into a great college.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it turns out that there's a lot more truth to that particular one at the college level than we would like to believe. or that, you go to another stadium, another away team, and you have to give half of every point to the other team every time. And it's one thing to say, I think the thing that's so interesting about economics issues is that people, if you start with the premise that people are like, don't change, you can really get into a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. And if you stop and say, people are capable of an unbelievable range of potential, and the environment they're in can dramatically change, whether they're living up to their potential and whether they're surprising you with what they do, or whether they're sort of checking the box.
Yeah.
And like that to me has become the thing I think a lot about, is like that sense of, how do we get the most out of life? Like what are the things, what's going to help the most people get the most out of life? And what did you find in running businesses that was the best way to achieve that for your team, for your employees? Because I think that's a problem inside firms, that in some ways firms are like these little islands of socialism, right? You're like, you're not transacting with each other on a daily basis and bidding and saying like, okay, well, I'm going to work with them instead of them. You're sort of all in it together. It's kind of a command and control scenario. You got the boss, you've got things you got to do, you've got your role that's assigned, and you've got to somehow create incentives for people to be the best. What are lessons you've learned from running businesses for how to create a good environment for people?
Yeah, that's a developing situation. I was probably a horrible boss in my carpet cleaning business days, and I think I got better over time, but it didn't happen overnight. That's maybe my lack of education could have done it. Maybe watching the way my dad ran our family, which is definitely command and control. He was a sergeant major in World War II, reported to a general, and so he's aide de camp for one of the top generals in Europe. But he was like, that was his. He ran his 8 kids family. There were 7 brothers and sisters. He ran it pretty much that way. But over time, I learned what worked and what didn't work, and I think learning about conscious capitalism was really great. I mean, the companies that I ran up until that were, each one got better and better and better, but still I didn't really get. Age has an experience, I think, has a big advantage in anything we do, and except for maybe sports, but in a lot of things we get that experience and you learn a lot of tools. So when I read John Mackey's essay on conscious capitalism, at the time was just published on his website. It was a couple of pages.
Yeah,
I was like shocked, like, wow, focusing on a deeper purpose, and as a company, and then really treating your stakeholders on a roughly equal basis, instead of just really focusing on the exit and how to get rich and all the things that I had tried to do in previous businesses. And it was sort of a relief to say, wow, I can run this business this way and just enjoy the process, as opposed to constantly scramble for how am I going to take it public and get rich. That was really a relief, and I think that trickled down or up to the people that worked with me, because all of a sudden I was treating them like I was treating my customers, like I was treating my shareholders, like I was treating my vendors, like I was treating the communities that I worked in, and that really, really changed things for me.
When was that about?
I think I read the essay in 2007 or 8, maybe before that, and then he wrote the book, became a bestseller after that,
right?
Time after that, but yeah, I read that, and so we set the company up under that format, and then other tools we've picked up along the way really helped as well. So we eliminated a lot of the command and control structure by putting in not only the conscious capitalism as a model, but we've established, now we're instituting the Great Game of Business, which is written by a guy named Jack Shack and Bo Burlingham, which is a great book, which is open book management. And that requires us to train even our line employees at our egg packing facility and what we call Egg Central Station up in Missouri, which is an $18 million facility, but it's a lot of hard work in there and a lot of $15 an hour, people. And just taking them over the top excited about what they're doing because you've created mini games throughout the company with objectives and where they get a nice bonus based on meeting those objectives, or don't get it if they miss them. And they establish those objectives themselves, and they monitor them weekly, and they have huddles every week. And it's really fun to watch how the level of excitement takes place and eliminates the command and control.
You're talking about Vital Farms eggs, which is we featured in our film At the Fork, and which, if you're going to buy eggs, people, you have to buy Vital Farms eggs. They're the best eggs around. I want to go through the story of Vital Farms because it is one of the things I think I use your company as a reference pretty frequently when I'm talking to people about, as an example of a conscious business. So how does Vital Farms? You've done this barter exchange. You've done all these other businesses. But you're not an agriculture guy, or that's not your background.
Well, I haven't told you about those businesses yet.
So get me up to the point, let's say, where you start what is going to become the biggest, most, I think, effective pasture-raised egg producer in the country. How do you get to that point? Like, how does that journey start for you?
We're actually tied for the number 2 brand of eggs in the country right now, behind Eggland's Best. So it's come from nothing to that. It's really shocking to me in one sense. In another sense, it's exactly how I thought it was going to go. So it's an interesting situation to be in. But so I had farms. I had my first farm in 1980, and I bought a ranch in 1982. I really enjoyed agriculture as sort of a hobby, and those are working businesses. The farm had commercial greenhouses, orchards, fields, and that we had crops and a number of different. They also had chickens, goats, milk goats, just on a homestead basis. So I had 20 chickens for their eggs, and I milked goats for.
Now, did you grow up with agriculture at all? Because one of the things I experienced, and maybe this is just a more current thing, but when in traveling around for the film, I was struck most of all by the dichotomy between agricultural sort of communities and the way I grew up in urban and suburban environments. Like, it never even occurred to me as a kid, oh, I should have goats in my yard. Like, that was not a thing that was in the purview of my potential ideas for my life.
My post-high school years is, when I told you I got involved in meditation and stuff, it got me involved in really good food also. So I stopped eating meat when I was a senior in high school and got into eating healthier food. It wasn't an organic standard at the time, but we looked for organic when we could find it. And so I was really after good food. And so when I bought the piece of land, which was a commercial greenhouse operation with 25 acres around it and a nice little homestead house and barns and things.
And where is this?
That was outside of New Braunfels in Seguin, Texas, outside of San Antonio.
Okay.
So when my wife at the time and I bought it, we turned it into we started getting chickens and goats and did all those things. But first of all, there was a magazine out, which is still around today, called Mother Earth News. And that was the homesteading magazine. And at the time, it had newsprint inside that newspaper. It had a color wrap, and then it was just all newsprint inside. Today it's more slick. But in the back of that, it had a book section. And so there was a book called Raising Chickens the Modern Way. And there was another one called, by the same author, Raising Dairy Goats the Modern Way. They're probably written in the 40s. But, they're ancient. But they were really good, solid technique that even today, as I have 1.5 million chickens on 145 farms. A lot of those techniques are still the basic techniques that you have to feed them and take care of them, and some of the basics are there. So a lot of the same way I did a lot of things in life. I got a quick education, and so I had chickens on that farm, and I had goats, and I would milk them and tend to them and do all the things we had to do. I remember performing surgery on a dairy goat while it's in its milk stand, right up with my book in my hand, reading how to do this, what I had to do. So yeah, you learn a lot of the things you had to do on a farm. And I think farmers are interesting folks, so they have to do this kind of stuff all the time. And
what do you think? is the biggest misunderstanding urbanites have about rural life and like agricultural life?
The simplest one is the amount of work it takes. I mean, I've had this experience direct. In Vital Farms, we started with one farm here in Austin, and I had been a farmer before, so I was familiar with the workload, and I'd also been a yacht captain, so I was interested in I was understood what it means to be in a rural environment, in case on a boat or someplace where you have to fix stuff, and you got baling wire and a pair of pliers. You can do a lot of stuff on a farm, and so, but the amount of work is and it's the amount of consistent work. You got to milk a goat twice a day, 7 days a week, in the morning and the evening, no matter what. There's no days off on a farm, and especially when you have livestock, so it's a constant. And so the workload is really, really tough. That's the number one lesson. When we first started expanding after the first farm, I was trying to find a second and a third farm. We got a couple of farmers that were in the area, or people in the area that had bought land in the country, and they wanted to be farmers, and for us. And so I said, well, here's how you do it. They were urbanites that had moved to the country. And in every single case, 100% of the cases, it was a disaster. I remember one couple called me up and they said, "I thought this was going to be this idyllic back to the land experience." And what happened? There was this one couple, and they were really nice. They had gotten an FHA or FSA loan, a government loan to buy the place, and really cheap interest, and had it all decked out. And they called up and he said to me, "Oh my God, I had to work 50 hours last week." And
50?
50.
Oh.
And I was like, I can remember a time that I had worked that few hours in my life. But yeah, because if you come from a 9-to-5 job, you're working 35, 40 hours a week your whole life, and all of a sudden now you're at 60 hours and there's no Sundays or Thursdays or days off, or every day it's the same thing. It's tough. So today, we only farmers we deal with are farmers. And a big chunk of our farmers are Mennonite. They have the work ethic that it takes to, that's what their communities have. And so we have farms in 10 states, from Georgia all the way to Kansas, and what I call the northern part of the South. Plenty of moisture, plenty of rain, lush green pastures year-round, no appreciable amount of snow that comes and goes. If it comes, it goes for a day or so. And so our birds can be out year-round on fresh pasture. And those farmers are, hard-working farmers. Some of them were dairy farmers. Some of them were broiler chicken farmers. Some of them were turkey farmers. But they're all farmers. They're crop farmers, cattle farmers.
So to come back to this sort of basic starting point question, which was, what was the problem you were solving with Vital?
It's interesting. It was a personal problem for starters. I am a lover of great eggs from chickens that have a diet that is varied and that live on pasture or outdoors.
And how are typical eggs produced?
99% of the eggs in the country, or now 97% of the eggs in the country, come from chickens that have basically one ingredient in their diet. And what a chicken eats is what the egg, especially the yolk, looks like a couple days later. And so since most of the chickens in this country eat corn, and that's all they have in their diet, corn, a little bit of maybe soybean meal or something like that in their diet, the eggs all have that pale yellow yolk. And so when my chickens on my farm, my first farm, and outside of San Antonio, they would run around and eat grass. I got these orange yolks with this delicious flavor to them, and they were thicker. And it's like, wow, those are special. And then if I had them cooped up because of weather or whatever reason, for a few days, I'd get, and all they had was the feed that I gave them, the regular feed that was always there. It would go back to that pale yellow yolk. And so I knew there was a vast difference. I cut the lawn and threw a bunch of grass clippings over. 2 days later, I had these delicious yolks again. It was back and forth. You could see it all the time. It was very apparent to me. Over the years, that was 1983 till right even into the mid-2000s, when we travel around, you're out in the country somewhere, and you see a sign that said yard eggs next to a farm, I'd scream off the road and go running back there. And some farmers had their chickens running around, and in those cases, I had great tasting eggs. Some of them had them cooped up. It would be just like buying one at Denny's or at Exxon.
Right.
And so I was on a trip with some friends of mine, one of your previous guests, and he was talking to me about the future of pasture raising and how we thought that the market might be open to paying a premium for an egg from a chicken that was outdoors. And I took my franchise experience. I thought about my franchise experience in the barter exchange days and said, wow, if you could get farmers around the country to follow a specific program, because I know it would take a pasture rotation where the birds would be outdoors on pasture and rotated onto fresh pasture, and you could get them to follow a standard, then you'd have what would look like a supply chain franchise. Not a retail, not the sales side, but a supply side franchise. And it wasn't really a franchise, but you'd have to run it like a franchise with that same sort of like, here's the rules, follow these, and we're going to pay you a premium. And then there was a friend of mine here in Austin, Jeremiah Cunningham, who was the first one that started producing these eggs like this for Whole Foods.
Oh yeah, I've seen the Cunningham eggs.
Yeah, and Jeremiah was kind enough to talk to me more about the details of what he thought pasture raising was, and so he shared that with me, and we kind of built our very first farm down in South Austin with the same type of format, and we had little mobile chicken coops that moved around. We'd haul around the pasture every couple of days, and so the chickens were always on fresh pasture and eating the grass, and that worked to a certain extent at the time. That we morphed that into a much more effective means that we use today.
Were you animated at all by the animal welfare side of
Absolutely, yeah.
So
I was talking about taste, but
right.
The other thing that I found personality-wise is that these chickens are sentient beings with real personalities. They're happy and sad, and they feel pain and their misery, and they can be completely cooing and happy and clucking because they're having a great time. You can tell them in the morning they sing. There's almost like a constant, almost the same tone sometimes in a large flock. There's a hierarchy. There's
pecking order.
Yeah, pecking order is a real thing, and for the good and bad. We provide them with roosts so that they can get, because once you're on a roost, all things are equal. They can't attack another bird on a roost, and so we provide roosts for them. And so I think that a happy hen lays a much better egg. And they also forage more and eat differently, and which helps, again, develop a product that customers want to buy as well. So
in that sort of conscious capitalism mindset, it's an interesting thing with the animal products. The animals are a stakeholder.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We don't treat them as an individual. We put them in the same box as a vendor. So they're the hens and the farmers are individually stakeholders for us, and we treat them we have a tremendous amount of respect for them. Our birds, the average hen in a cage is the most tortured farm animal there is, I think, on the planet.
Yeah.
There is no worse. It's worse than being a foie gras goose. Yeah. Give me a funnel down my throat and force me twice a day before you stick me in an elevator with like 10 other guys
for 18 months.
Yeah, with a 4'10" ceiling. And all you can do is eat and poop and lay an egg, drink water,
and be pooped on, right? Because they're stacked. And
oh yeah, it's horrible. So that they average 62 square inches a bird. A free range, not free range, but a cage free bird gets about 112 square inches, and a free range bird doesn't get much more than that because there's no real free range out there. They may get another square foot outdoors, but they never use it because they don't really give them full access to it. A little pop hole typically. So it's just basically the same thing. It's a barn or a warehouse-raised chicken. And our birds get 108 square feet outdoors. So it's massive. It's, think of this room, for every bird outdoors on green pastures. And you can see what they have available. That's throughout the course of a year. So that they get to, and all of our farms now have, every farm we've had in the last few years, we require them to have trees in the pasture, and it's not no longer just like a mowed lawn. These are Southeast Asia jungle fowl, so we have trees. They're forest edges on our pastures, so they actually can go in the forest and use the trees for protection, which is natural to them as protection against aerial predators, and also they love foraging in the forest because there's more goodies out there than there is in a real green grass.
It's funny, we're about to move, and the neighbor has a small flock of chickens, and as we were over the weekend, I went over with my wife Lisa, and we were getting to meet our new neighbor, and they had the chickens, and Lisa said, "Oh, John really loves chickens." And at the start of making At the Fork, I had no exposure to chickens, And of all the animals, in a way, as far as like the main animals, pigs, cows, chickens, they're the least, at first glance, they're the least likely for you to empathize with. Birds have those kind of like almost dead-like eyes that they're just kind of staring out of their head, and they're real skittish because they're chickens and they don't want to be near you necessarily. And so I feel like there's such a challenge as people when you can't break at least that basic level of empathy with the animal. Never mind the fact that most people don't think about the dinosaur-shaped thing that they buy at the grocery store wrapped in plastic, that it was ever an animal to begin with.
Yeah, it's sad, and but they're such interesting beings. You talked about the eyes. So chicken has the two eyes are on either side of the head. One is nearsighted, and the other is farsighted. So one is for seeing. So one of the reasons why chicken turn sideways and they're looking at you is they're pointing their good eye at you, and the other eye, and they can shut down half their brain and sleep with one eye open and one eye shut, and the resting one half of their brain. They're really fascinating creatures with a tremendous amount of capabilities people don't realize. Get to know your neighbor's chickens, but don't fall in love. My theory on urban backyard chickens is 24 months, 100% mortality rate. I've never seen a flock last in the city. They get killed by everything, and most people don't. I wish that every backyard farmer in urban environment would read Raising Chickens the Modern Way, because there's a lot to it. People just get chickens at the feed store, put them in their backyard, and they're dead in 6 months.
What's the number one thing? Just predators? Just
dogs. They have to have a 6-sided enclosure at night. 6 sides. Bottom has to be completely enclosed. So I would suggest wire on all 4 sides plus the roof and the bottom, and it's a tight seal so that nothing can, not a mouse. Because if a mouse can get in, a rat can get in, a rat can kill a chicken at night. I can list the predators here in Austin. You wouldn't believe it. I mean, they're fox, possum, skunk, coyote, neighborhood dog, cats. We have in our neighborhood, we have ringtail cats, which look like a lemur. They're all over South Austin. Look them up there. I've seen them in my backyard. They have a tail like a fox. They look like a lemur, and they come from South America, but they're all over Austin. And they're great. They love chicken. And
it's a problem. Everybody loves chicken.
Yeah.
Poor chickens.
Yeah, so there's any number of those critters will kill them. And then that doesn't include the aerial predators. And the aerial predators are more prolific. They're the worst killers on farms. But red-tailed hawks. Then there's the seasonal predators, the caracara, which is a Mexican eagle that comes up twice a year on the way, coming through either way. And any type of flying predator. Owls are tremendous. They love them. I had a bobcat eat 200 chickens on my farm in South Austin. I thought he was pregnant. When I found him, it was a male, but he had a belly on him, because he'd eaten so many chickens. And silently, they didn't leave any carcasses, whereas coyotes leave carcasses, and male raccoons will just chew the heads off of every chicken they have without even eating them. Females are nice enough to go and take a chicken and bring it back to the den. But the male raccoons just do a mass killing.
They're just for sport or for fun or for something.
It's horrendous.
So what was your biggest challenge in getting Vital to be fully operational in the early years? Did you have something? Was there any one kind of scar-inducing obstacle as you were getting this off the ground?
Not scar-inducing. I think I was mature enough in my business career. I think I probably had 40 companies by that time, and so I had enough scars that I didn't need any more, and didn't need to learn too much. But I did take did some experimenting on different types of feed, and what I learned is that the raising of chickens has been so well done scientifically over the years. You don't need to do too much recreation. I was hoping that pasture would replace the fact that these birds are also omnivores. They're not cows. They don't have 4 stomachs. They can't live on grass. They need to have a steady diet of grain in their diet or seed, like a bird does. And if they don't, like any bird, they'll stop laying eggs when the protein level falls below a certain level. So it's one of the reasons why a robin doesn't lay an egg in the fall is because the protein levels start dropping and daylight gets shorter. And those 2 things trigger a response in the bird that lets them know that we don't want to lay an egg in the wintertime and have it hatch in the snow. And so we fool our chickens in this country, and we make sure they get an even amount of light every day. So when the daylight gets shorter, we add a little artificial light, and we also do it by adding protein in their diet, and they get a little bit of grain in their diet every day. I thought I could offset that cost by, going in. I went to Whole Foods warehouses and picked up all the produce that was out of date, and I'd bring it back to the farm and unwind it and feed it to my chickens, and they loved it. It made great eggs, but the lay rate started going down, and so I had to learn some of those lessons. The other big lesson is that it took a while to convince people that to pay the kind of money it costs to produce a pasture-raised egg. And at first, I got chicks, I raised them up to laying age, which is about 22 weeks, and I got the eggs, and I washed the eggs and pack it, and I went onto Craigslist and bought a bunch of refrigerators and sort of put them together and plugged them in. I had refrigerators full of eggs, and after I cleaned them and packed them into cartons, and then I was on the phone trying to sell them, and then I backed the truck up, load up a truck, and take it to the food bank and give them all away because I didn't have any customers. So that was, but slowly but surely I got over that.
What's the current, do you have a rough delta on price between your eggs and sort of the conventional egg? Does it vary based on the region that you're producing in?
No, our prices are pretty consistent nationwide. So there's different levels of eggs. The cheapest commodity egg, call it $2 a dozen. That's that yellow
foam carton gas station egg.
Yeah, but the birds live in cages, 6 to 8, in this torture environment for the most part, in my view. And then you have the next cheapest, is what they call cage-free, which is the same environment, but they're all in a warehouse on a floor, and instead of in a cage. Not much better. It's a false program. The whole, in my view, the whole idea of cage-free is absurd. It doesn't offer a much better. You're jammed together in the same jam. You're in a mosh pit instead of the elevator. But
they've got to still clip the beaks because of the pecking and all
that stuff, all the heart. The next one is what they call, I guess, free range is a non-issue in this country because it's not defined. So you could sell a cage-free egg, or you can call anything free range. No one cares. There's no standard. No one's supporting it. And then you get into organic, which could be a barn or warehouse-raised chicken with the feed change to organic feed. But some organic companies actually let the birds out a little bit, a couple square feet outdoors just to.
Yeah.
So they actually.
I was surprised how little, to learn how little the organic standards really touch on the animal welfare aspect.
Yeah,
they really don't.
Some people
Whole
don't care.
Foods has been the only one to really raise the bar on animal welfare standards wise.
Yeah, the perception is that it does offer, and that's we've been involved with the organic standards in our country. As a company. And we push for the standards for animal welfare because, and the way I explain it to people that don't really care about the animals is, well, if you care about the money and you think you're getting a premium for organic eggs, then you ought to care that the customer. And I was at a function. I'm in this organization called the Organic Egg Farmers of America, and I was talking to the group just a couple days ago in Minneapolis, and I said, if the customer perception is that is one way, and you're delivering something that is not nearly what what they believe they're getting, then you got a problem. You absolutely have a problem. If there would be a news story that would embarrass you about your methods, then you have a problem. The customer believes that a cage-free egg, when 83% of we did a poll. Complete, just an off-the-shelf poll, not our customers, the general population. We asked 790 people, this is about 5 years ago, when you hear the term cage-free, what type of agriculture do you think is taking place? They described our 108 square feet outdoors bucolic pasture.
Yeah. No cage, they're out there running around in the grass. It's like free-for-all.
The most 99% of the cage-free eggs in this country, the birds never seen a sunlight in their life. They've never seen anything. They've never seen a blade of grass in their life. And all they've seen is the head of the chicken next to them, and so it's a real problem. It's an economic problem for the farmers too because it's going to explode. In Europe, UK, there is 2 types of eggs that are sold, and that's it. For 30% of the market is conventional, what we call caged eggs in this country. So and it says right on the carton, caged. You want a cheap egg? Buy the caged egg. The other 70% of the market, there's a couple percentage in between, so call it 29 and 69%. But the other 2/3 of the market, 70% in the UK, is free range. But in that country, free range is a term controlled by law, and it describes exactly very similar to what we do in our country for pasture raised. It's 108 square feet outdoors for organic, and and people don't want to buy anything in between because they know there's no value. So cage free in UK is called a barn egg, and I think it's way less than 1%.
One of the things that I learned coming out of making the film about all this stuff was because people would ask me, so you had this experience, you're this urbanite, and you went on all these farms and you looked at all these practices, and so what should I do? What's the one thing I can do? And the one thing I say every time is, well, switch to pasture raised eggs. If you eat eggs, switch to pasture raised eggs, because, like you said, they are the most tortured animal in the food supply, and they're also I don't remember what the numbers are as far as I think more chickens are raised for meat than for egg production by a very large margin, but it's still the number of lives that are impacted, animal lives that are impacted by.
There's more chickens on the planet than humans.
Yeah,
there's 10 billion chickens on the planet.
It's remarkable.
Yeah,
and I said the other thing is, okay, so it's a couple extra dollars for the pasture raised Vital Farms egg. It's a couple extra dollars. So if I think like the cynic says that's like 300% more. It's like it's 300% at $2. Like,
yeah.
If you have one less latte, you've got a week's worth of meals at this just tremendously different level at every step. How the animals are treated, the quality of the eggs, and
the flavor.
And and it's like the whole experience of it, and so you've grown this from trying to figure this out and reading these books to, you said how many egg laying hens do you have now across the whole network?
Probably about 1.5 million right now in the farms. Yeah.
So what are the obstacles now to taking it to another level, to getting for Vital Farms to go to be 15%, 30% of the market? Is it possible?
We have plenty of farmers on deck. So because we've treated our farmers well, we've earned a reputation among farmers that, so we have hundreds of farmers that want to become farmers for us. So we have a vetting process for those, and so that part of it's taken care of. The customer base is growing steadily. Our growth rate is phenomenal, and it's been pretty much the same for the better part of a decade. So that is in place. I guess one of the biggest factors is always looking for great talent, and so it's not an obstacle because we have phenomenal talent on board. But we're always looking to hire great people, and because that's the biggest thing. And you hire wonderful people, and then the job is easy. I have a tremendous leadership team, and I always tell my leadership team, it's the measure of your success as a leader is how few decisions you have to make during a week. On an average week, I make very, very, very few, if any, decisions anymore, because I have great people. And that lesson goes all the way through the organization. So you want to get out of command and control, hire great people, give them the freedom to set objectives for them. As long as they're hitting them, get out of their way and let them do it. And that's really, so when you're growing at 50% a year, year after year after year, every 2 years you've doubled the size of your company. The way I look at it, it's like, think back. We've built this company over the last 12 years. Think how long it took us to get here. In 2 years, we're going to put another one of those 12 years companies right on top of the company we just built. In 2 years.
It's amazing.
And we do that every
logarithmic.
Yeah, we do it every 2 years. And we've been doing it for a long time. So the company's gotten, gets bigger, and we have to, the way to manage that is to stay ahead of the curve and always get the right people in the right seats on the bus in the company and just really find those people. And so we're on a constant talent search. We just hired a vice president of talent. And we spent 6 months hiring that person.
Right.
so that the rest of us can get out of the business of constantly, doing it, and so my senior leadership can move on to other things. But yeah, it's a big part of what we do.
I heard the description. I think it might have been the CEO of Overstock.com in an interview said, when you start your company and it grows, and then at some point as the CEO, if you're the CEO, your job goes from managing the company to designing systems. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I think that I was doing a lot of system designing in the first few years, in the first several years. But since then, I've hired really good people who are better at it than I am. And today I do very little of designing systems, but my leadership team does. And the top leadership team, I know they'll be successful when they stop designing systems. And the folks below them, in the organization or above them in the organization, depending on your point of view, are the ones, that really do need to design it because they're the ones that live it every day.
So I want to come back to conscious capitalism. You said, at the entry point into the financial crisis, so it was like a kind of perfect timing in a way, right? You read this piece by John Mackey about conscious capitalism, and that it really had a profound effect on you. So dig into that more. Like, what did that mean? Because that overlays with Vital and this 12-year journey you've been on with building Vital Farms. What did conscious capitalism mean practically as a entrepreneur? What did it unlock for you?
It gave me the freedom to express myself in a business format without the pressure of worrying about the big exit, making a lot of money. It just said, if you focus on these 5 stakeholders and give them your attention, then basically magically things work out on the bottom line. And it has for me. It is almost like magic. I mean, I focused on really taking care of the environment in the community. That's one of my 5 stakeholders. So, we don't put any fertilizer, pesticides, or herbicides in any of our farm pastures anywhere. It's not, all of our pastures are treated organically. And so what does that mean? It means that the communities, there's none of that stuff's running off into streams and rivers and into the oceans. We develop a bond with our vendors, and that's unheard of. I met with a vendor today and it said, you're probably used to covering your ass and when you're dealing with someone, but if I get a bid from you and your work comes in more expensive than because of something that happened than you expected, come back to me and talk. I want a lifelong friendship with you as a vendor. On the other hand, if it comes in cheaper, I expect you to come back to me and say, I overbid this thing because I want that trust. We really treat our vendors like that, a very strong relationship. And we don't nickel and dime them. We don't make them come and bid the job, bid their work every year. We like to establish a relationship. And as long as that we're given kind of most favored nation status by their part, that they treat us with trust and they treat us well, we'll stick with them. And we support them the same way. And the same thing goes with our customers. We treat them, because customers come first, but we treat our customers as a full standing stakeholder like we do our shareholders. And our crew members, our employees, we call them crew members because I've been a sailor my whole life. And so our crew members are the same way in Vital Farms. We treat them just the same as we do our shareholders or our customers or our vendors. And so, it goes throughout the whole organization. And a lot of times, it's not just not words. We live it in the organization. I can walk into a meeting and hear people talking about our stakeholders almost every day. How does that affect the stakeholder? How does it affect that stakeholder? And we've made some really tough decisions as a company that impacted the other stakeholders, and we brought those stakeholders to the table, if not in person, but in spirit when we did it. A few years ago, I'll give you a great example. A few years ago, we had, and this goes to how you pick your partners as well, we now have about 7 private equity firms that own a minority interest together. Not together, they come in at different times, but all together they own a minority interest in the company. But they're on my board, and they have majority of our seats on the board. And they have a huge financial stake in our company. So a couple of years back, it was after the avian influenza had hit, The year after that, a lot of
So this
farms.
is 2015, right?
Yes.
It was the avian flu epidemic.
It killed 15% of the chickens in the United States were killed by it or through euthanasia efforts and to stamp it out. And so those that didn't have avian influenza, which is basically all the average size of a farm that had avian influenza was 1.1 million birds. And one farm had 5.5 million birds. So you can see that these were big factory organizations that, for the most part, that had it. But when it was all over, those that didn't have it, the commodity egg prices went up really high. So they made a lot of money. So the following year, everybody took a bet. Way too many took a bet. And the market was flooded with eggs. And it impacted us because the prices were going down to like 29 cents a dozen at some places for eggs.
Right. So now you were in a tough spot to compete on those with those
yeah,
prices.
And then we had a couple of other instances that happened at the same time. We had I won't go into the details, but it was a competitor that did some stuff that was we thought pretty much under the table, and so we ended up with too much capacity that year, and it was 2016, and so we had a choice. Our contract called for, we have an exit clause in our farmer contract that says that, if economic conditions change, it was an economic condition out for us. And we started considering doing that, and we did it actually with a couple of farms before we all of a sudden came to our senses and said, this is wrong. This is not what we want to do. And so what would it cost us to lower the capacity on the rest of these farms? In other words, not give them new flocks when the time came, in order to have less eggs throughout the rest of this year, and until demand started catching up with the supply again. It was the only time we ever had a glitch. We still had a growth year, but it wasn't our typical growth year. And it was going to cost us, every dime we would have made that year, 100% of our income for the whole year. It would have actually put us in a loss, and which is a lot of money. It was, we're talking high seven figures. And so we went to the board. And we said, this is what we want to do. We want to pay these farmers to sit tight. We don't want to lose them. And we want to give them an income, and so they don't produce. And it was a unanimous vote on the part of the board.
Even those dreaded private equity firm types.
Every single one of them, 100%. It was an investment in the farmer. It was an investment in the company, and it was doing the right thing. And so that decision was a stakeholder decision. We looked at all the stakeholders, how it would impact us. And sure enough, we had a huge spike in our sales ever since. And our farmer, we've never had to scramble to get another farmer on board. Every single farmer out there that's in our area that could grow for us really wants to grow for us. And it's really been a great experience. I go to we have quarterly meetings of our farmers, called them grower meetings, and we bring in outside experts, PhDs from universities, and talk about different parts of the details of what they do every day. And the enthusiasm is massive in the room for us, and it's really great to see that.
I want to spend the last bit of time we have before you go, coming back to this philosophy. So, as a capitalist, as somebody who's devoted his life to trying to, in a sense, sort of sell the benefits of capitalism, if you will, I hear your story and what you just described and say, yes, of course, like it's baked into the cake of capitalism, because it's never a one-time deal with business. You're gonna have a next year. You're like, and I've seen it firsthand in industries. I mean, in the entertainment industry, when you screw people over, it doesn't create a great environment for you when the going gets tough.
Yeah, I was watching the movie Hoffa yesterday. I was flipping channels, and it was great. I hadn't seen it in years, and you could see, why did these unions get created? It was because it was unconscious capitalism. It was industrial, when they treated the workers like shit, and at some point there was an opposite reaction, and but if you look at companies like Whole Foods that have never had a union, why? It's because they treat their employees with the same respect that they treat their shareholders and their customers, and as a result, there's never been a really a strong movement in that direction.
You and I have had some political conversations, and we don't talk really very much about like Democrat Republican politics in this show, but you're a moderate Democrat, right? Mm-hmm. And we have this movement now, it seems like, where the right in America has kind of lost its mind, but it seems like so has the left. And at the center of it, the thing that worries me is that business and capitalism and the role it plays in our society is being kind of torn in a bunch of directions. Either you're against capitalism or you're against, globalization, which is an integral part of it, or you're against immigration, which is, especially in agriculture, is an essential part of it. How are you thinking about where we are right now in like the public conversation about business and about capitalism?
Maybe it's crazy, but I have a lot of faith in the American electorate in the long run. I lost a lot of it in 2016. I was shocked, but it's never been so wrong about an election in my life. But yeah, I think that as long as people in this country see that there is a path to get ahead, and that path is clear, then business will be supported. I think when an individual or a group in society feel like there is no path, then they lose all hope, and they're going to look for some alternative means. And so, we were provided an ever-increasing pathway to success for minorities in this country. They've come a long way. In terms of their rights and justice in the last 150 years since slavery, and since it's as long as there's that path. But when someone sees that there's a dead end and they lose hope, then they're going to look for other means. So we have to make sure that we always provide that pathway. And I don't think we need to pave that path with gold. I think that it needs to be clear that it's hard work, but I think there's things we could do in this country to make that path smoother, and that would balance it out. And there's there's not one way. There's many, many ways. Whether it's providing, a junior college education to everybody that wants it, as part of an automatic program like high school is today. You can just, get a jet. Whether it's, I'm not sure what the answer is, but if associate's degree is going to get a person that much closer, then maybe that is one of the answers. But there are answers out there to get people there. I think that I've talked. I think universal basic income has a funded universal basic income as an alternative to welfare and other forms of basic giveaways. It makes a lot of sense because it puts choice back in people's hands.
Yeah, so you've been doing a bunch of work on this. Uh-huh. So talk to me, like what is this concept, the way you're, as you've been thinking about it and doing research on it, and it sounds like really like putting some serious like thought and time into it. What have you come to so far as like how to reimagine, social welfare platform?
We put a name on it for simplicity. We call it Sea Change. And I got together with a PhD in public policy who is a researcher with a financial background, and hired her to go to work on an idea that I got in January of last year, which is eliminating the federal income tax on every level, corporate and individual, eliminating all welfare, eliminating government subsidized housing, eliminating the Veterans Health Administration, eliminating any required unemployment insurance, so an unemployment pay, no more government unemployment benefits, and replacing it with $1,000 a month in universal basic income for everyone 18 years or older, and $300 a month for every child, and also providing universal health care. Undefined which method that is. There's a number of things on the table, and funding all of that with a 26% national sales tax, a consumption tax. And so the reason I know it makes a lot of sense is because no one likes it, and I have fun with people. So on the left, they go crazy. Like, what do you mean you're going to charge people a consumption tax? Yeah, 26%. They're getting
It's
$1,000.
regressive. That's regressive.
Okay, but when I talk to every poor person I know, and every lower middle class person I know, and every person who's making $15 an hour in this country, and say on top of your pay right now, you're going to get on a family of four, that's $31,800. I think that's what it comes to a year for a family of four. You're going to get $31,800 a year, tax free, because there's no more tax, and you're not paying income tax on the money you're making right now. And in exchange for that, and by the way, universal health care. So you're going to have full health care.
This is the one where we probably part ways a little more, but
Yep.
yeah.
So you're going to get all that. In exchange, you're going to pay 26% on top of whatever sales tax is out there right now. It's going to cost you about 32, 33% nationwide to buy something. But you have control how much you buy. It's up to you.
If you save, you don't spend it.
You don't spend it. That's
Yeah.
right. 100% of everyone I've polled in the $15 to $20 or less per year, the people that are worried about it being regressive, of saying, count me in. Give me the check. I'll make that decision.
Right.
So it's elitists that are saying, On the other hand, I talk to right-wing Republicans say, you're going to give them something for nothing, you're going to make them lazy. Well, the thing is, we already are with welfare. We already are with we're rewarding people for not working in unemployment insurance. We reward people for not working with welfare. We're giving these rewards. We have incentives not to work. This removes 100% of incentives. So if you're a family of four and you're getting $31,800 a year and you think that's good, you might think it's good for a few months. But it's going to come pretty clear pretty quickly that there's no penalty for going down to McDonald's and getting a half-time job, 20 hours a week, and pulling in another, what is that, $15,000 a year? That's $15,000 of incremental income. And once you see that $15,000 coming in, maybe the spouse looks at it and say, I'm going to take that Walmart job half-time. And all of a sudden you got $30,000. Now you're at $61,200 a year in tax-free income, which is the same as a $100,000 a year person makes today. And you've created middle class in this country. And you've done it by simply reorganizing the deck a little bit. And no more IRS, by the way, which cost us nearly $100 billion a year just in salaries and enforcement. Totally gone.
Which is shocking. And who likes the IRS?
And we haven't even approached the benefit to corporations, which zero income tax. Zero. No more capital gains taxes. So investment goes shooting up. If you look at it across the board, the advantages are just, and guess what? We did all this, we do all this, and we reduced the deficit by $200 billion a year from current standards.
Yeah, so it's a couple questions. So the first thing is, if you're conservative or if you're from Republican or whatever, the biggest free market thinkers of the 20th century, which I would say is Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, both effectively were for some form of what you're describing. Mm-hmm. Milton Friedman had something he called it the negative income tax. Hayek was a little less specific, but he had two things. He literally, I believe, said something akin to a wealthy society, can and should provide something akin to a basic income. But he also had a general principle, which is what has always attracted me to this idea, which is that our legal institutions should treat everyone equally. And that you should have a kind of generality rule that if you have to make a carve out, well, we give you this money unless you're like this, or unless you live here, or unless you do this or that, that you instantly are basically violating a basic principle of
equality,
liberalism, which is equality under the law, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very sympathetic to the universal income side of it. I think the other factor, which is Hayek, is you're giving people the money. It's like you're letting them decide what they're going to do with their life. You're not playing this sort of, and this is the elite problem, right? It's this, well, I want to give them the money, but I want to tell them what to eat, and I want to tell them what to buy, and I want to tell them where to go to school. And there's a kind of paternalism baked into the current cake of the things that we have now. And it creates all these bizarro things where somebody can actually be working a job and it will be a net loss for them to get a promotion because of the way the current system phases things out faster than the next dollar of like raise you might get.
Yep.
But I have gotten a little more worried in recent years, especially after working on this my second film project after At the Fork, with the prospect of so $31,000 a year is is not enough for a lot of people for the lifestyle they desire, but it is probably enough for some portion of people to sort of subsist.
Guess what? More jobs for the rest of us. You know, it's supply and demand. If you look at the whole thing, you know, it's interesting how it balances out. If they're happy with $31,200 a year, they're probably also happy in another world, which is the one we live in today, on welfare. I have a relative, I don't want to say which relative it is, who's been scamming the system his entire life. Right. Barely ever had a job. He's been scamming the system, and he's got an IQ of like 160. Okay, and smart guy, but he's scammed it for years. He's gotten every form. He's on disability right now. He's on Social Security, but before that he got one thing after another. And there's all kinds of ways to not work, and this is fine. You take them out of the game. Okay, they're here on the planet. That's fine. We were working sun up to sundown 150 years ago, year round, and always have. Right. So we went from working an average of 80 hours a week to 60 hours a week to 40 hours a week, and now 35 in this country. And I'm adding my plant that I just opened up in Springfield, Missouri, I'm adding 6 new robots this year to take the crappiest jobs in the place that no one really wants to do. But it's going to, those are 6 people times, 6 robots, whatever the number of robots, it's going to replace like maybe 10 jobs. We're not firing those people. We just won't replace people that leave for whatever reason. But ultimately, it's going to replace 10, whatever there's 10, 15 jobs in the plant. And that's going to keep happening. It happens. There's a reason why, we're not buying so much coal anymore. And the reason why the Rust Belt is rusting is because we're replacing with robots. It's not because the jobs have all gone to China.
Right. Manufacturing employment in China is actually declining.
Right. So you look at the numbers. It's 35 hours a year now. Another 10 or 15 years, it might be 20 hours, 25 hours a week. And so we're going to need to have these things that are doing this great work is going to need to supply income to the people in some way, shape, or form.
I'd say it's a loving criticism because in general, I'm very sympathetic to this concept. But the thing that worries me about it a little bit is not that, so your relative there's no system that's going to get him to come on board and become a contributor to society. He's in it for the take.
You could do things like, if you're really worried about contributing to society, then you can do things like mandatory volunteer service, mandatory, like either you join the military for 2 years like they do in Israel, or you go to work for the Vista program or something like that. There's lots of things you could do to enhance that. But at the end of the day, $31,200 a year for a family of 4 is not going to seem like a lot. There might be one lazy person in that family, but I bet there's going to be a couple of kids that want the sneakers that the other kids in school have, that they can't afford. And sooner or later, there's going to be a Matt O'Hare, in that's going to get out and go to get a job at 15 or 8 years old, and he's going to be making more money than mom and dad. So at the end of the day, I think what you're going to see is that people get out of the system. Hourly wages are going to go up because there's more demand. There's more jobs than there are people at that time, and there's going to be this constant flow. I think it's very, very capitalistically, economically, it's going to level itself.
Yeah, I think this to me is the interesting, like leaving aside the fact that the cleanliness of it seems politically impossible in America because we don't do clean, rational public policy here like they do in the Nordic countries where they actually seem to do things like privatize airports because we trust you. You're like us. Happy Hugo. Let's have private roads and private airports and all kinds of stuff that they can do over there. But let's imagine we can. I think the thing that with my lingering question is not about the incentive. Like, it's not the incentive. I guess it is the incentive in a way, but it's the question of the dignity. There's a dignity in feeling useful.
Sure.
And I do worry about, will more people slide into this sort of like methadone drip type life?
I think that they will, but there's always going to be a case of the next door neighbor or other people they see having things they want. And because in this particular situation, there's no incentive not to work other than the work itself.
Right.
But you're not being paid like you are with welfare not to work, or you're not being paid like you are with unemployment. You lose it if you go back to work. There's no incentive not to work. That it's always there. And someone's going to say, wish I had this or I wish I had that. And like, that's easy. Get off your ass and go, because they're hiring a McDonald's right down the street. And even if you only want to work one shift a week, that's still $160 a week or whatever it is, at $20 an hour they're going to be paying by then. That 160, maybe you're tired of drinking some lousy brand of alcohol and you want a better. It could be any reason, any type of incentive. It's there for you. It offers every opportunity. And I want to go to healthcare real quickly because I know you don't like the healthcare aspect of this.
Well, let me explain why for somebody who's hearing this conversation. So my problem with the healthcare issue is that it's materially different than cutting. So when you're cutting people checks, you're not running into what's called the knowledge problem of, fundamentally is the reason why these socialistic economies break down is that you can't make economic decisions when you don't have a market, when you don't have the cost of supply and demand for this or that thing happening as the result of whether it's available or whether it's needed. And that's the problem I see with the healthcare side is healthcare is a very complex economy with a lot of suppliers and a lot of different needs. Not all of it's productive, and there's a lot of alternative uses for people and equipment. And that economy, when you say like let's make that universal, you're saying have a kind of Soviet healthcare economy.
So let me take a different look. You talked about how the legal system ought to be equal for all people, and there ought to be certain things that are the same to level out. The problem is that people don't all have the same medical issues. And so we have various.
Yep.
And you can, because you happen to be born with a condition or have MS or some disease beyond your control, you can have a situation wipes you out financially. So that $31,200 is gone because you got $200,000 of your medical bills. So when I say universal basic income, I also mean universal basic in health insurance. You're not going to get the special treatment. You're going to have to wait in line. It's not going to be fun. And by the way, you want private stuff? Well, I just came back from the Mayo Clinic. That's where I get my physical. It takes 2 days. That's how long my physical is every year. And I'm paying extra for that. But to me, it's worth it. I'm not going to go to a physical when the doctor throws me a pair of socks and I can catch him and hits me in the knee and with a hammer and says, your reflex is good, have a nice day. I want the physical that lets me know. I want a dermatologist looking between my toes.
Right. Sure.
So I'm happy to pay. Guess what? I can go get a job and get an extra treatment that I may not be able to get on universal basic health insurance. But I think we need to level the play field, so that we take out catastrophic situations because they happen to be born with one condition or another. And you take that worry out as a society, and you're not going over and above. You're not going to do crazy shit for people. They're not going to get liposuction. It's not going to be that way. They're going to be able to go and get the basic stuff taken care of. And if they have a severe disease, they're going to know they're going to get whatever coverage makes sense. But that we have as an advanced society, we're the last place on earth, really, an advanced society that has not offered some type of smart. I think the Germans have a great plan, which is more, the Germans have a lot of great plans in a lot of areas. And I haven't given enough thought to it. I didn't go into detail and see change on the white paper, but I think that we have to cover that to make it work.
Well, I'll put forward the corollary to your universal income would be a kind of universal HSA plan. Sort of, you get the catastrophic, and maybe it's a $20,000 or a $10,000 annual deductible and above that, but maintain that information and economy that comes from people having to pay for something instead
maybe
of this,
that's
because we've
universal
got
basic income. If you give it, you say, okay, here's a plan. It's got a copay program like my insurance is today. It costs you $20 to go to the doctor. Big deal. It's got insurance, a drug program like we have today. You do some copay on it, and maybe there is for the stuff that maybe you have $3,000 or $4,000 per person. You can't do 20,000 because they'll wipe out. But
right.
You have something that's it's cause a little bit of pain, but not a lot of pain. It's not catastrophic. It doesn't ruin their life because they're born with a club foot or with some type of defect that that can be fixed, but they can now get it done.
So as we close, what's next for Matt O'Hare?
I'm enjoying life. I love building Vital Farms. It's the company's full of people today that are much smarter than me, and so I used to see myself as more of conductor, and now I'm even more in the audience in a way. But I'm watching. I'm there every day in one form or another in the company, and really enjoying it. And I'm constantly looking at ways to fun ideas. I've started a couple businesses in the last year just for fun, and they have to be fun for me. But and then really focusing on some other ways to give back. I've gotten a lot in this life, and so I've got some friends that have done a really great job at giving back, and I need to learn more about better ways to do that. So that's ahead for me as well.
Well, thanks for taking the time, Matt.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Emergent Order podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. If you're interested in being a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@emergentorder.com. Our producer is Jesse Bennett. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.